Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Winans. I'm a PhD student in the Crop Physiology Laboratory at the University of Illinois. And I'm excited to be able to share some of my research and findings with you in corn production here today. As much as I would love to be in person and meeting all y'all today, we're getting pretty good at these virtual meetings, so this will work out just fine. Like I said, I'm a PhD student. I'm in the third year of my PhD work with Dr. Fred Bilo. What we do here at the Crop Physiology Laboratory is small plot research on corn and soybean yield production. So we look at factors that affect yield and what management decisions growers can make to improve their yield on farm. And what I mean by small plot research, this is a little different than what you guys may be used to. You guys may be used to more strip plot style research. But what we have here, this is an example of one of our research sites. This is actually in Nashville, Illinois. I didn't realize we had a Nashville, Illinois either until about a few years ago. We moved down to this farm. But this is an example of one of our research sites. And on this site, it's about 20 acres of corn, and we have 11 trials crammed in there. And then within each of those trials, there's probably on average 70 plots or so. It just really depends on the size of the trial and the size of the plots. But you can see how these different trials are all laid out here. And then these plots are quite a bit smaller within the trial. They're about 40 feet in length and 4 rows wide. And so what we're able to do is eliminate field variability, because we can put this on a very tight area within the field spatially, and then we can replicate it extensively. So each treatment out here is replicated anywhere from 6 to 8 times. So we have very good replication, low variability, and allows us to do very high precision research on agronomic practices. And to kind of put the amount of research that we do into perspective, here's some 5-year totals over my stint here at the University of Illinois. Corn, we're pretty heavy in corn research compared to soybeans. Corn is king here in Illinois, and we actually only have 2 crops here, and soybeans are rotation crops. So corn is definitely king, but there is still a lot of potential with soybean. We'll be focusing on corn today, but total over the last 5 years, we've had over 300 total trials, and we've probably worked with anywhere from 30 to 40 companies to come up with those trials. And then about 50,000 corn plots. On total, 65,000 plots we've put in over the last 5 years. And we've done this across the state of Illinois. We try to pick up different areas in Illinois, different soil, different native soil levels, also different weather patterns across the state. It's a pretty long state north to south, but right here in Champaign, Illinois is where we primarily have most of our research. This is where the University of Illinois is. And then we have our northern research station at Yorkville. And then we have a Southern Illinois research station in Nashville now. We were in Ewing for a stint prior to then. But you can see that the fertility levels changes drastically as we go from north to south across our state. Very high OM and as well as P and K levels in Northern Illinois. And then that slowly goes down as we move south, and we're on some lighter soils, 2% organic matter in Nashville. We're still above critical levels, 28 parts per million P. And then we're a little low, 76 parts per million K. But this allows us to take, multiple comparisons across environments within 1 year. So, we only get 1 year for research. And if we can take a trial and replicate it across 2 or 3 sites, it allows us to come up with more consistent and more in-depth findings in a shorter amount of time. Now, one thing that we don't want to vary across sites is the equipment that we use to put out this research. And this is a picture of our research convoy that we take out in the springtime when we go planting. So here we have our pickup trucks, our semi. We've got our planter tractor, as well as our tractor that pulls our liquid and dry banding toolbars. We take all of our fertilizer and chemical offsite, all of our seed, as well as our RTV. So we're taking all of our inputs and all of our equipment offsite with us, trucking on the road. And so we're able to eliminate variability as we go farm site to farm site. And then also that's easier for our farm cooperators that are offsite. That's less nuisance to them when we come to town. And the reason why we are doing all of this work is because we're trying to close what we call the corn yield gap. And what I mean by that, the corn yield gap is the difference between what's the possible yield and what we're currently achieving on farm in yield. So the U.S. average corn yield in 2020 was 172 bushels per acre. But we know that the genetic potential of today's corn hybrids is much higher than that. David Hula set his record of 616 bushels per acre. And then the non-irrigated record, which was set last year, I believe, was 422 bushels per acre. And then also there's a lot of research out there that shows that for most corn producing regions, the average yields don't exceed nearly 70% of what's potential. You know, the yield potential of a specific corn hybrid, they always say, is the highest when it's still in the bag. You know, and then once you stick it in the ground and it has to deal with the environment and the climate, you know, that's when that yield potential starts decreasing. So where we come in is, how do we close the gap between on-farm yield and what yield is potential? And I'll tell you what, it's a really, really simple formula. All you have to do is feed and protect a high density of the best racehorse hybrids and make sure that crop is never stressed. It's that easy. That's all you have to do. Now, I'm just kidding. I know that's a lot easier said than done, and that's why we have a team of 11 graduate students, and why Dr. Beal has been fighting this challenge for the past several decades. And that's why I'm here to help you, you know, share some things that we've learned here today. So where do we start with bridging this corn yield gap? Well, first we can look at, you know, what factor has had the greatest impact on achieving the yields that we see today. You know, how has grain yield increased over the past several decades? I'll tell you what, the factor that has changed the most and led directly to increases in corn yield is planting population. So in this jagged dotted line with the blue triangles is the U.S. average grain yield since the 1960s, early 1960s. You can see we've almost tripled that yield. We started off around 60 bushels, and now we're up average over a little over 180 bushels. And then I have superimposed over that what the U.S. average planting population is. That's plants per acre. And you can see back here in the 60s, we're planting down around 1,300 plants per acre. And today we're upwards of 31,000 plants per acre, 31,000 plants per acre. And I know there's a lot of growers that are planting 36, 38,000 plants per acre, much above this. And the reason why these two factors change together, grain yield and planting population, is because yield can be separated out in sort of an equation here. So grain yield is a product function of three yield components. That's plants per acre, plant population, what we just saw on the last slide, kernels per plant, how many kernels, what's the yield potential of each one of those plants, and then what's the weight of those kernels. Now, the only thing that a grower has in his control right now, today, as we sit here, is the number of plants per acre he's going to decide to plant. These other things are a little bit more affected by the environment, you know, fertility programs, agronomic management, but the one thing that he can decide today is how many plants they're going to put out per acre, and ultimately that sets your yield potential. The number of plants is a governor of overall yield. So if we look at this slide, population has increased a little under 400 plants per acre per year. And it's going to continue to go up if we want yields to go up. But we're sort of running into a challenge here, or maybe a little bit of a plateau we've noticed over the last half decade or so. And the challenge is when we get, you know, beyond a certain threshold that we can, you know, ultimately handle in today's standard 30-inch row system, and with today's current genetics, is these plants start competing against each other, and you have, you know, density stress that's beyond what it can tolerate. So I'm going to test your knowledge of high yield corn here. And my first question is, what happens to the size of each plant's root system as plant population increases? And I'll go ahead and spoil the answer here since I can't call on anybody in person, but it gets smaller. And we know this because we spent many, many days out in the hot, humid weather digging roots. And I can tell you what, this is by far our favorite task as graduate students that we get to do year after year. You know, we come out to the field, we dig these roots up, we bring them in on our RTV, then we have all these cattle troughs that we soak them in, we set up all these pressure washers, we bring in all of our water tanks so we don't have to, you know, be slowed down by stopping to fill up water during the middle of the day. And then we take all these roots off and we'll image them or weigh them or whatnot. But, you know, but by far our favorite part of this entire task is the pressure washing. And as you can tell here, here's two of my master's students that just absolutely love pressure washing. And I think Dylan here is a little irritated because I'm not nearly as muddy as he is, and I'm taking the picture of him, but he got over it. And like I said, this is just a great task, great bonding task for us that we get to do every summer. But like I said, we take these roots and we'll image them, we'll weigh them, and try to quantify surface area, angle, everything. And so here I have a picture of 3 roots at 3 different planting populations, 30,000 plants per acre. This is a little under what most growers are planting here in central Illinois today. 36,000 plants per acre. This is what I would say most of our progressive growers would be planting. And then 42,000 plants per acre. This is, looking at the future down the road. If we want to continue increasing corn yields, growers are going to have to be planting, pushing densities upwards of 42,000 plants per acre to take advantage of that full yield potential of the hybrid that they are planting. And here's some weights to back this up. So 12.3 grams per plant, 10.5 grams per plant, and 9 grams per plant. That's about a 2.5% decrease in root mass per 1,000 plant increase in population. And we actually see this 2.5% decrease with regardless of the parameter that we're measuring. We see that in surface area, density, volume, everything. It's around 2.5% decrease in root mass. So as you can imagine, as you bump up populations, you're drastically decreasing each plant's individual root system, which limits its ability to search out and find limiting resources like water and nutrients. So the future crop production is really going to take a shift towards how can we manage more plants and increase yield, and that's exactly what my PhD work is focused on. One of these strategies, and this is one thing we've been looking at for the last 5-6 years, is narrowing row spacing. So here I have 44,000 plants per acre in a 30-inch row system, and this is standard for us here in Illinois. And then here I have the same density, 44,000 plants per acre, in a 20-inch row system. Now, when I keep density the same, the amount of plants per acre the same, but I put more rows out there, I divide them across more rows in an acre, I actually increase the plant-to-plant spacing within the row. So here we have 4.8 inches between plants within the row, and here we have 7.1 inches per plants, 7.1 inches between plants within the row. And so one thing we do is when we space those plants out, we actually gain some of that root mass back. The other big advantage that we've seen with narrow row corn is light interception. I think you can tell the difference here in where this light is being captured. There's a lot of light hitting the soil surface here in the 30-inch row systems, and I don't have to tell you what that does for water holding capacity and weed pressure. That this is going to dry your soils out a lot quicker, and it's going to close your canopy a lot slower, allowing weeds to come through. Here we're capturing more sunlight, holding more moisture in the soil, and we're going to close that canopy a lot quicker. We're going to achieve maximum light interception earlier in the season than we would with a 30-inch row system. And here's just kind of a top-down look of what this might look like. So these are your 2 rows, conventional row spacing 30 inches. Look how close these plants are together at 44,000 plants per acre. And then this is the comparison of how spaced out they'd be in a 20-inch row system. And what we see, we've dug roots in both 30-inch rows and 20-inch rows. Here I have our 2 spacings, 30 inches, 20 inches, 3 different planting populations, 38,000 up to 50,000 plants per acre. And what we see is about a 20 to 25% increase in root mass when we switch from a 30-inch row to a 20-inch row within any one of these respective planting densities. Also, I think this is really cool. We didn't plan this, but if you look at any, one of these root masses in the 20-inch row system, so we have 10.3 here, that is the same individual root mass as 6,000 less plants in a 30-inch row system. So it's like taking you 6,000 less plants backwards in terms of root mass, but you still have that higher density, you have a higher yield potential that you're able to set. And then here's the yields behind this study. So this is the average of 6 hybrids in 2 locations in Illinois from 2017 to 2018. What's really interesting, as I said, this 38,000 plants per acre is far beyond what the average density is being planted today with today's commercial corn hybrids. And you can see why here. We're not increasing yield significantly beyond 38,000 plants per acre in a 30-inch row system. But we get this 8 bushel yield increase when we go from 38,000 up to 44,000 plants per acre in a 20-inch row. So far beyond what most growers are planting, and there's still yield to be had there with today's genetics. And as you'd expect, the advantage of the narrow row system becomes more prevalent as you increase density. So, you know, only a 7 bushel response to narrow rows at 38,000 plants per acre. We got a 13 and 17 bushel response when we bump that density up. So kind of summarizing this density and row spacing work, for continued yield increases, plant population must go up. They trend together. Think of plant population as what your yield potential ultimately is. So to increase your yield potential, you need more plants out there. But as you do that, you have increased density stress, and plants are a little bit more crowded, and we see a 2.5% reduction in individual root mass per every 1,000 increase in plants per acre. So at some point in the near future, I would say, higher planting populations are going to necessitate a switch to narrow rows. I got another test your knowledge question here. Will growing more plants with smaller root systems necessitate a change in how we apply fertilizers? Well, if we take a look at how we're currently applying fertilizers, this is our current fertility strategy for most growers in Illinois, and I would assume across most of the US and Canada. We're putting our nitrogen out there based off of what our expected yield level is, and our P&K is based off the soil test. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, that soil test was calibrated to yield back in the 60s and 70s. You know, we had about a third of the yield that we're producing right now, and about half the plants per acre back then as well. So I don't think what it was, the yields and the densities that was calibrated for in the 60s and 70s is representative of the thresholds that we should be using right now in 2020. So how can we assure adequate soil fertility for higher yields? And we've come up with this future strategy, and I think this looks an awful lot like the 4 R's. It's precision management of key nutrients using the correct source, rate, timing, and placement of fertilizers. And now whenever I say correct source and rate, you know, I'm not saying, you know, put P&K out there based off the soil test value. I'm talking more in terms of removal rate and, you know, fertilizing for what the crop needs. So this is some data that we published from internally in our lab. This is the nutritional need for 230 bushel corn. And I have 6 key nutrients here on the left side. I have the pounds, the amount of nutrients in pounds per acre, what's required to produce the crop, how much of that is removed with the grain, and then our harvest index. It's the percent of total nutrient taken up that's removed with the crop, removed with the grain from the field. So that's our harvest index. And so, like I said, these are our 6 key nutrients. And the reason why they're key, they're either nutrients that are required in very high quantities like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, even sulfur, or they're nutrients with a high harvest index like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, or they're a nutrient that has a unique uptake pattern like boron, which is highly remobilized from the leaves right around pollination time. And so these are 6 nutrients that we try to focus on. And actually, if I remember correctly, I think Mosaic might have a couple products that covers these 6 nutrients. And so we're actually using those products, Micro Essentials SD and Aspire, to cover these nutrients in some of our research. But we're not only looking at the right, you know, rate and source of nutrients, but we're looking at the correct placement. And by placement, I mean banded fertilizer. This is our pre-plant banding toolbar. It blows dry fertilizer down through this delivery system from this Montag box, and we've got Coulter row units that opens the slit, blows that fertilizer in about 4 to 6 inches deep, directly beneath the future crop row, and then we're coming in and planting directly over the top of that. And we prefer this over your standard broadcast fertility system because, you know, here's an example of what that broadcast fertilizer looks like when you put it out there. You know, there's this misconception that these roots from this corn plant is crossing the row. Well, you saw some of the pictures of those roots that we dug up, and they only have maybe a 6-7 inch horizontal span, so they're definitely not crossing the row. But when you put out your nutrients broadcast applied, you know, you're applying it to the soil rather than the surface. You have all these nutrients hung out here in the inner row that's not being immediately available or taken up by the crop. But when we band it directly beneath the crop row, those roots and that crop has direct access to those nutrients right from the start, which is very important for setting yield potential. And then also you're decreasing fixation because you have less fertilizer to soil contact because you're concentrating it there. So we hope that we have greater season-long plant fertility. And this is what we see time and time again with banded fertilizer. So here on the left, there's no fertility based on adequate soil test values. And here on the right, we have 100 pounds of P2O5 as microessentials SE banded directly beneath the crop row. And this is a very early, V3, V4 crop stage. This is right before this plant is going to be terminating kernels around and kernel length. And the fact that we have a higher supply of nutrients within direct access to those roots is very important for setting our overall yield potential. And another benefit to this that we see is greater stand uniformity. So here we have, your standard plant density, 32,000 plants per acre, broadcast fertilizer, and you've got this guy here. This is what we call a plant left behind. This guy is essentially a weed at this point. It'll never crop up, or it'll never catch up to its neighbors. It's going to put on a barren little dinky ear, and like I said, it's just robbing nutrients from its neighbors on the side. Here we've got the future crop production, 44,000 plants per acre. Look how close together they are. So you can imagine a pretty small root system, but we're banding nutrients, 250 pounds of microessentials directly beneath that crop row, and we see a lot more uniformity in stand and emergence. And this is what this plant left behind will look like later on in the season. And you may be asking me, why the hell are we planting 44,000 plants per acre? And that's like I said, because that's where we have our sites. That's going to be the future. And when we have banded fertility in place, this is some of the things that we can get away with. This is a study that we ran in Champaign back in 2019. This is an average of 10 hybrids. We had 3 planting populations, 30,000, 36,000, and 42,000 plants per acre. And here I have response to broad. So it's change in yield from no fertility to broadcast fertilizer. This is MAP and MOP. And this is response to banded fertilizer. It's putting it in the band directly beneath the crop row. And you can see when we bump these populations up, the overall delta, the placement delta, change in yield from band to broad, is nothing at that lower density. We don't see the advantage there at that lower density. So this doesn't work every time. But when we bump those densities up, kind of like what we saw with the row spacing, we have a smaller root system, nitrogen, precision fertilizer placement, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium becomes much more important. And you can see here what another thing that we think is really interesting is our response to banded fertilizer is very consistent across these densities, but broadcast fertilizer becomes very insufficient when we are decreasing root mass and bumping that population up. It's just much harder for those plants to access the fertilizer you're putting out there for it. And this same concept of banding nutrients near the crop row where the roots can access it also translates to other practices. Starter fertilizers the same way. Even for in-season nutrition, we're looking at wide dropping as opposed to coulter down the center of the row. So here we're putting out nitrogen UAN around the V6 growth stage, right by that crop row where we know the roots are. We know the roots aren't out here in the center of the row, so why would we not stick them right next to that crop where it can move down into the soil and be accessed by the roots? And when we use this wide drop system, this is mid-row placed UAN compared to wide drop placed UAN, we see about a 10 bushel advantage when the side dress is needed. Now, you don't always need that supplemental nitrogen. It really depends on your overall yield potential of the crop. But when it's needed, we see that the wide drop placement is far superior than mid-row. So to kind of highlight some of the points from our precision fertilizer placement segment here, high populations and smaller root systems will necessitate better placed fertility. But as you could, I'm going to kind of spoil this next test question here. Do management practices work together or synergistically to improve yield? We already saw that. Higher densities and narrow rows, they interact. They're working together. Banded fertility, higher densities. You can combine them together and increase yield beyond what you would be able to with just the banded fertilizer or just the higher density. So we know that management practices are working synergistically together. And so that's what we've come up with our standard management practice, and we're going to compare that to our enhanced management system. Our standard management practice, as I already said, is P&K based off the soil test value, which is almost always you don't need P or K fertilizer here in Illinois. No sulfur micronutrients, Nitrogen, we're going to fertilize based off the maximum return rate, which is usually 160 pounds of nitrogen. Pre-plant population, we're at the average U.S. planting density, 32,000 plants per acre, no fungicide, and then we're going to be in our standard 30-inch row system. But on the flip side, there's an enhanced component to each one of these management factors. For fertility, despite our soil test being accurate, we're going to put down banded microessentials and Aspire for 100 pounds of P2O5 and 75 pounds of K2O. We're going to come back with an additional 80-pound side dress for a total of 240 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We're putting that banded fertility underneath the crop row. We're getting off to a better start. So we know that our yield potential is going to be a little bit higher. We want more nitrogen out there to carry it out through the rest of the season. To take advantage of all these nutrients out there, we're going to bump that density up far beyond what most growers are planting, 44,000 plants per acre. We're going to protect this crop. Like I said, we got to make sure the crop never has a bad day. We're going to protect this crop with a strobilurin fungicide at VTR1. And then we're going to put this in a 20-inch row system. And when we combine these management factors together, we're looking at the synergisms of them together. Well, what does this look like in an enhanced system compared to a standard system? And I'll tell you what, it's pretty striking. So this is Champaign, Illinois, June 7th, 2017. This crop here on our left is our standard management. And if I was a grower standing in my field and it looked like this, I'd say, you know what? It looks pretty good. I'm not seeing nutrient deficiencies. It looks pretty good for June 7th. But that's because I don't have this crop on my right sitting right next to it, shading it out. This is our enhanced system. The only difference here at this point in time is we have the 12,000 additional plants, and we have the banded fertilizer directly beneath the crop row. And we're also in the 20-inch row system. So we're getting that crop out of the ground a lot sooner, and we're focused on above ground shoot growth. We're closing that canopy. We have the higher density of the narrow rows. So we're maximizing sunlight interception at this key moment when the crop is determining what its yield potential is going to be, what the number of kernels per acre is going to be. And then when we carry this out to the end of the season, we have the side dress nitrogen, the fungicide. We keep this crop photosynthesizing later into the season. We have more ears here because we're planting more plants per acre, but the key thing is that we're still filling these kernels to the tip. And so that leads hopefully to a higher yield, and it does. This is from 6 environments. In each one of these environments that we did this study, we had anywhere from 2 to 3 trials looking at these and standard versus enhanced practice. And so this is a total of 13 trials averaged together. And every time when we average together that enhanced system, those 5 factors was worth 53 bushels over the standard system. Now, you'll also notice that our yield potential gradually increases year after year, both in the standard and enhanced system. We're starting off in the mid 200s in the enhanced system, and then we're topping out at 300 bushels in 2018. And I will credit that to every year we're always selecting the next best racehorse hybrid to put in this study that we know is going to respond to these management factors and produce a top end yield. So when we manage this over these 13 trials, these 6 environments, and we get a 53 bushel response. Is each one of these factors worth about 10 bushels to come up with 5 bushels, or to come up with the 50 bushels, or are some factors worth more than others? And to answer that question, we have this very handy but complicated Omission-Addition plot design, and I'll walk you through this here. So in this blue bar, this is our full enhanced system. It has all 5 of our factors at the enhanced level. We have the phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, potassium, and boron. We have the base nitrogen plus side dress, 44,000 plants per acre. We got the fungicide and the narrow row system. But to see the value of each one of these factors within the enhanced system, we're going to remove it or swap it with the standard version of that factor one at a time to see what the yield decrease is from taking that enhanced factor out of the system. And then we do the flip of that. We have the addition side. So we have the standard system. What's the yield value of any one of these singular enhanced factors alone, while every other management factor is at the standard level? I like to think of this in terms of a basketball team. We have 5 factors or 5 players. This blue team, the enhanced system, is your Toronto Raptors. You've got your 5 players. And then this orange team is my high school basketball team. So if I take a player from my high school basketball team and I put him on the Toronto Raptors, how much is he going to drag down the performance of those other 4 players? Or if I take a member of the Toronto Raptors and I stick him on my high school basketball team, how much is he going to elevate the performance of those other 4 players? And that's really what we're trying to answer here. And this is what this study looks like when we throw it out. This is Champaign, Illinois in 2018. You can see we have our different blocks here. So this is a 30-inch row block, and then these are a little bit closer together. So that's our 20-inch row block. And just look at the plant height differences across the field. You can really tell there's a difference with that banded fertilizer as we move across the field. What we're first looking at here is what our average standard management yield was 212 bushels, and then what the yield value of adding any one of these factors to that standard system. So when we added that P and K fertilizer, banded fertilizer to the standard management system, we gained 14 bushels per acre on average of those 13 trials from 2014 to 2018. When we added the supplemental nitrogen, that was worth 10 bushels. This is our swing factor here. Population. When we bumped from 32,000 plants per acre up to 44,000 plants per acre, but we didn't have the fertility in place to manage that higher density, it really couldn't handle it. It set us back 6 bushels. Fungicide, worth 5 bushels on average. That's more of an environmental practice. This is 13 trials. There were some trials where we needed the fungicide, and there were some where we didn't. Averages out to 5 bushels. So, on average, that's a good practice to manage your crop, but obviously there's going to be some environments where it's more economical than others. And then row spacing. Even though row spacing is more valuable to high density, even when we're at the 32,000 plants per acre in the standard management, we still got a 10 bushel response to narrow rows. Now, when we look at omitting any one factor from the enhanced system, so this is our overall enhanced system, all 5 factors, 265 bushels, but we're going to omit one factor at a time. So first we're going to omit fertility. So we have everything else in place, the high density, the nitrogen, the fungicide, the row spacing, but we're just going to omit the P and K fertilizer. We forgot to put it out. We lost 20 bushels when we omit the banded fertilizer. Very important practice here for a high management system. Nitrogen, no, we opted to not put the side dress out. We lost 9 bushels. Population, like I said, this is the swing factor. We have all those nutrients in place, but we didn't put enough plants out there to take advantage of it. Set us back 12 bushels. Fungicide worked the same in the enhanced system, 5 bushels. Row spacing, much more important in the high yield system, almost worth 20 bushels. We're at 19 bushels there. We can compare these guys side by side. The factor that is almost always the most consistent and important factor is basically the foundation for a high yield crop is better plant fertility. We see this time and time again. It's the most important factor in both of these systems. If you're going to do one factor as a standard grower, I would do the fertility. If you're going to opt to remove one factor as an enhanced grower, it better not be the fertility. Another thing that we see here is almost all these factors are a little bit more important in the enhanced system than they are in the standard system. So it's not necessarily what you do to increase yield, but it's what you don't do that'll decrease yield pretty drastically. Like I said, population's that swing factor. It's the only one that set you negative both times. You got to match your management level for the plants that you're putting out there. So, if we look at the individual sum of these factors, fertility, nitrogen, population, fungicide, row spacing, in the standard system, the sum of those is 33 bushels. We're still 20 bushels shy of what that value was when we combine them together in an enhanced management system. So again, it's a synergistic approach. It's a systems approach. We got a 20 bushel yield boost by combining those 5 factors than if you were to just take the individual sum of those 5 factors. Now, can we expect this 53 bushel response to enhanced management every single time we put this system out there? Of course not. Like I said, we were every year after year, selecting the next best and greatest racehorse hybrid from the leading seed brands. And we were, pretty confident we were going to see these yield bumps. But hybrid selection is very crucial. You have both your racehorse hybrids, your top-end yielding hybrids that will really shine when you manage them correctly. But then there's also workhorse hybrids out there, and those hybrids are actually going to be your more consistent yielding hybrids. They're not poor yielding, but they're just consistent yielding. They can handle marginal ground a little bit better, but they're not going to be, the hybrid you're going to choose for an enhanced management system. And so how do we determine if a hybrid's racehorse or workhorse? Well, part of my research is focused on directly that. I have this trial. It's called the Management Yield Potential Trial, or MIP trial. You know, nothing's important unless it has an acronym, so I call it the MIP trial. And actually, you can find our full report at the Crop Physiology lab website, posted up here at the top. And what it does is it evaluates commercial corn hybrids for those yield responses to those management factors that we just looked at in that past trial that we were looking at. And within each one of these environments, I can test 36 hybrids. I've been doing this for 2 years now. 2021 will be the third year. But we're looking at 47, upwards of 56 hybrids in each one of those years, represented by 6 seed brands, and they range in maturity from 105 to 120 days. So up here in Yorkville, we're planting a little bit shorter than what we are down here in Nashville and Ewing. But it's not just your standard variety testing trial that's just looking at their overall yield potential. We're looking at how these hybrids respond to those management factors. So we have an additive treatment or additive level approach. So this is a stair-step approach. So unlike the past trial where you're adding or omitting one factor at a time, this system builds upon it. So you have our standard practice. This is the base, 36,000 plants per acre, 30-inch row, 160 units of nitrogen. And then we're going to add an additional 60 units of V6 for a total of 220 pounds of nitrogen. Then we will continue to build upon that. So we'll have the side dress in place, but we're also, prior to planting, going to band 200 pounds of microessentials and 100 pounds of potash directly beneath the crop row. We're also going to, once we have the fertility in place, we're going to add that foliar protection at R1. In this case, we're using Mirvis Neo and Warrior from Syngenta. We're going to bump that density up from 36,000 to 44,000 plants per acre. And then lastly, we're going to look at what that 44,000 plants per acre does in a 20-inch row system. So there's a couple things that you can do with this design. I can take the yield at one level and subtract it from the next level and get the response to that factor. So I could take the yield from enhanced fertility and subtract it from the yield I was achieving at foliar protection. And then I can ultimately get what that hybrid's response to foliar protection was. And then also this full Monty treatment down here, the narrow row treatment that has the fertility, the foliar protection, the density, that is essentially your enhanced management. So I can compare the enhanced management, the narrow row treatment, to our standard management. And again, this was done in 2019 and 2020. So this was after we concluded our addition omission plot design. And this standard yield on average of 216 total hybrid entries from 2019 to 2020 across 6 environments was 195 bushels. A little bit more modest when we average across a whole host of genetics rather than just high yielding genetics. And you can see just how important hybrid selection is here. This is Champaign, Illinois, Central Illinois in 2020. I've ranked for their overall yield potential the 36 hybrids from the highest yielding hybrid to the lowest yielding hybrid. So pretty important that I'm selecting the right hybrid for my environment to stick in here. Now, we always get asked, what's the silver bullet here? What's the highest yielding seed brand, or which hybrids are the best? Well, really, ultimately, it depends. It depends on how that hybrid is going to respond to management. Obviously, that's what we're talking about today. There's no certain companies that are better than others, but one trend that we have seen in our data is that these higher yielding hybrids tend to have a little bit longer relative maturity than these lower yielding hybrids. So some of these hybrids, 114, 115, 120 days is far beyond what most growers will be planting here in Illinois, especially northern Illinois, and as you move up to your guys' region. But what we've seen on average is at about a 2 bushel gain per 1 day increase in comparative relative maturity. So again, I think it has something to do with utilizing the full growing season. It's just a hunch of mine. But you plant a hybrid that's going to stay alive for the whole season, you can capture sunlight and energy and translate to that yield over the whole season. Now we look at the response to nitrogen on average of those 216 hybrids, 5 bushel response. Fertility, only a 4 bushel response. And again, like I pointed out, this is the average of many environments. This is a lot more modest than what we saw with our omission plot data. This study, or this trial, saw a whole host of different soil test values that ranged in organic matter from 1.5% organic matter up to 6.3% organic matter. Huge range in yield levels from northern Illinois to southern Illinois. And you know, a lot of variability in our yield environments. We've seen, as you guys know, with the environments we've been dealt in 2019 and 2020, we've seen super wet conditions, especially in the spring of 2019, super dry conditions, especially this past grain filling period. We've had great conditions over that stretch as well, and we've had horrible conditions. Our research in Champaign, Illinois in 2020 actually got hailed out. It caught a significant amount of hail. So, you know, this data set is a lot more variable than what we saw in that Omission-Addition plot design. But nonetheless, we still, you know, it's interesting data that is going to be very useful for us. This is the average response to banded fertility across these 6 environments. 4 bushels, 3 bushels, 19 bushels down in Ewing, our lowest fertility level site. There we're seeing fertility sort of translate with the overall, response to fertility sort of translate with the overall soil test values. A little bit rougher conditions in 2020, on average, not seeing a response to banded fertilizer. But like I said, there's 36 hybrids within each one of these environments. And there's this huge range in response, or a huge range among these hybrids and how they're going to respond to that fertility. And we don't have time to dive into it today, but there's a whole host of reasons why these hybrids can respond differently to banded fertilizer. A lot of it has to do with this root structure. You know, some hybrids just generally have more dense and bigger root systems than others. And so that's a big component of it. So that's a little explanation on why we saw a little bit more modest response to our fertility in this study in 2019 and 2020. Foliar protection. These tougher environments actually led to great foliar protection responses. Here's our 6 environments. Overall, across the board, great responses. 2020 in Champaign, where we caught some hail, got the 14 bushel response. This best response we had, 2020 in Nashville, Illinois, that's Southern Illinois, we had a 22 bushel response on average across the 36 hybrids. And that's because we had a pretty severe southern rust infestation. So here's this is what this MIP trial looks like from above. And you can see I have a block here by fungicide pass. So Mirvis Neo and that Warrior insecticide as well at R1 got flew on in these blocks, and it didn't receive it down the middle here. So this is looking at our response to foliar protection. That gave us that 22 bushel response on average. But just like the fertility and just like everything else, you can assume that there's going to be this genetic interaction with how these hybrids are responding to fungicide, because you can just see some of these hybrids without the fungicide or look like they're doing just fine. And then lastly, we have our high population and our narrow row treatment. On average, we gained a bushel when we bumped from 36,000 to 44,000 plants per acre. And as always, narrow rows is a better arrangement of that higher density. So only 24 bushel response to enhanced management system. You know, a little shy of that 53 bushels that we saw in our addition emission study. And again, a lot of that has to do with the genetic and environment interaction. When we introduce both racehorse and workhorse hybrids, we get a wide range in how these hybrids are going to respond to enhanced management. Here's an example of a subset of 6 hybrids, and I have their yields here under standard management. These hybrids yielded very well under standard management. This is in Champaign, Illinois in 2019, 236 bushels up to 200 and almost 50 bushels. And here's what these guys did in response to enhanced management. Only a max of a 10 bushel response. This guy actually statistically showed no response, or set it back a little bit, 2 bushels. So this is what I would call maybe more of your workhorse hybrid, high yielding hybrid across environments, doesn't really show the response to enhanced crop management. Now, on the contrary, these are what we'd call our racehorse hybrids. Don't yield as great under standard management as your workhorse hybrids did, but they show these great yield responses to enhanced management. So even though on average we only saw that 24 bushel response to enhanced management in this study, there's still some of these hybrids that are really taking full advantage of that season-long nutrition, the extra plants, and the narrow rows. So like I said, this is what I'd call your workhorse hybrids up here. This is what I'd call your racehorse hybrids. So to bring this all together, you know, how do we bridge the corn yield gap? It's got to start with better plant fertility. You know, if we're going to continue to increase planting populations and increase yields concurrently, it's going to necessitate better placement of the right source and rates of fertilizers especially your immobile nutrients like potassium and phosphorus. And then it's a systems approach. Like I said, it's a really simple, easy solution here. You got to feed and protect the higher density of the best racehorse hybrids. And actually, as you can see, environment plays a pretty big role in that too. It can throw a wrench into some things. But that's sort of been our formula here. Feeding and protecting a higher density of the best racehorse hybrids. It's going to take better hybrid characterization on your, even, in your sub-region if you're going to want to run some of these enhanced management factors. But it is achievable, and there's a lot of yield to be had, to be achieved with today's genetics if they are, if those plants are arranged spatially and fed correctly. So all this work that I've done, it's not just me. Like I said, it's a vast team of more than about a dozen graduate students, as well as Dr. Bilo. This is a sign of the times, as you can tell. This is a crop physiology laboratory team in 2020. This is Dr. Fred Bilo here in the middle. He's the mastermind behind it all, and he's the one that gave all of us grad students the opportunity to come and do research just like you saw today under his advisement. I also would be amiss if I didn't thank our financial and product support partners here. These guys have, supported us either financially with product, fertilizer, seed, chemical, some of these guys with equipment even, or better yet, all of the above. So huge shout out to them. Our lab is not funded by the government. We don't get a dime from the university. So all the research we look at is supported by these companies right here, and I couldn't be more grateful. Lastly, here I'd like to thank our farm cooperators, Bob and Brad Stewart at Stewart Farms up at Yorkville, Illinois, the U of I Research Farm in Champaign, Talon Becker at Ewing, Illinois, and then Danny Bartling of Bartling Farms in Nashville. And a special thanks to you guys, the listeners, and FS partners for giving me this opportunity. It really is, I really am excited for this opportunity to be able to discuss some of my research with you guys, and this is great experience for myself to communicate some of my research with real world partners like yourself. Thank you.